All right. We're going to do a quick tutorial on putting a table view in a view controller. We're going to add the functions that we need to have an array to be able to pass in the information to populate the data, and then we're going to pass it over to a new view controller in this quick tutorial. So the first thing I'm going to do is come into my storyboard. Now I've kind of prepared this project a little bit, but we'll go through it. So first thing we're going to do is go editor, and I'm going to put this inside of a navigation controller because I know I need to have two view controllers and I need to be able to move between the two. So the second thing I'm going to do is create a second view controller. Just pull it out, and then I'm going to go into the identity inspector right here once I've selected that view controller. I'm going to specify this as my second view controller. Now you can see over here I've already created a second view controller class. Very basic, nothing really in there that's not pre-populated. Then I'm also going to create what's called a segue or transition between these two view controllers. We're going to use show, which essentially just pushes it onto the stack coming from left to right. So now that I've got that, I need to name my segue. I'm just going to call it making transition. We'll need to remember that later, but we should be good for now. So we're going to come into our view controller. I've set up a couple of things in here already to make our life easy. I've said that the view controller needs to implement the UI TableView data source and UI TableView delegate protocols. Now those tell us information about our table view, which we need to add in our storyboard. I've created a very simple array of strings, and then I've appended to those strings in the view did load section. I've set up a very simple three functions for the table view, one for number of rows in section and cell for row and index path, which are required functions for the table view protocols. In the number of rows of section, I'm just returning the count of the array. And then on line 28, this cell for row at index path, what I'm doing is getting a reusable cell from the table view. Now, if the table view doesn't have a reusable cell, meaning it's the first time it's been created in the stack, then I need to create one. So I first check if it's nil. If it is nil or doesn't exist, then I create one. I say the style is the default style, which essentially is a text label on the left-hand side. And I specify the reuse identifier is the same as the one I was trying to get on line 29. The reason I do that is because I need to be able to get the same cell. On line 34, I specify that I'm returning that cell, and I'm guaranteeing that there's going to be a cell there using the exclamation point. On line 37, we've added another function that's did select row at index path. This is what gets called when we actually tap on a row in a table view. And then line 38, one of the things that is something I always do is say deselect. Basically, that means when I click on it, it highlights it for a second, and then the highlight goes away and goes back to the normal white color. So let's go into the storyboard and add a table view to our first view controller. I'm just going to come down here and filter for it. Say table view, drag it out. And we're going to let the auto layout constraints put it in the right place for us by just clicking add missing constraints. That should take care of it. Now we actually need to tell the table view's data source and delegate what view controller is going to respond to their protocols. So we're going to do a control click, drag up and click on data source, and then we'll click on delegate, specifying that for those two things. Now when we come back into our view controller, we should have just about everything in there to be able to show these three strings, this, that, and wow. The one thing we have left to do is specify the cell.text label. Text is equal to array index path dot row. Now this is what this is going to do is tell us exactly where where in the array it is and where it's going to. So I'm going to build and run this now. Pull up the simulator. Launches, and we can see this, that, and wow. We can also see that when we click on it, it just disappears, which is exactly what it should do. So now within this did select row at index path, we need to call perform segue. We'll go back and find out what we named our segue. Is making transition. So we'll come in here and say making transition. And then we'll come to sender, and we're going to pass in that string of the row. We've created this other function, this override function called prepare for segue. And we pass in an any object that could be nil, but we're passing in a string. We have our second view controller, so we're going to do let svc, so I use that for stand for second view controller equals second view controller. Except for I can't do it that way. I actually need to get the segue destination as the second view controller. Then I can do svc dot some property, but we haven't created it, so we'll just call it some string and set that equal to sender that we've passed in on line 40. So we need to go into our second view controller and create a property. So we'll just call it var some string equals a string object is what we're saying that's going to be. Now we should be able to just kind of step through this and see everything happen. So we're going to put breakpoint here in line 16, our second view controller. We need any's type, or sender's type is any, so we need to specify that it is a string. And then we can build and run it and get rid of that one error. So we've got this, that, and wow. I'm going to click on wow. It's going to hit this first breakpoint right here, so we can see the sender has some data in there. If I print it out, you can see that it's an optional, and some data is actually the string wow. So I'm going to just continue on. It's going to go into our second, and we want to make sure that this some string got populated. So I'm going to print out some string, and it did. So we've created, it's just a quick review of what we've done. So now we could actually use some string somewhere in our second view controller. So what we've done is on our storyboard, we've put a view controller inside of it, embedded it inside of a navigation controller, added a table view, set up the constraints, pulled in another view controller, created a segue between those two view controllers. Within our view controller.swift, we've added the functionality to be able to support a table view, specifically the number of rows in section and cell for row at index path. We've created a prepare for segue and populated it, grabbing the destination controller and passing in a string. That string we created here with the arrays. So that should be everything you need to be able to create a table view and do all of those steps.